Alright students, let us start today's topic, that is Introduction to Chess. And this video is optional and intended for those players who don't know how to play chess, or for those who need to review the chess rules before getting to the main part. So if you are familiar with the chess rules, you can skip this tutorial and move to the next one. So chess is played by two players who move turn by turn. Play takes place on a chessboard that contains 64 squares, that is 8 rows and each of 8 squares. The squares are alternatively light and dark and arranged in such a way that each player has a white square in his right corner, and it can be learned as a thumb rule like BW. So black comes first as B comes first in alphabetical order. And similarly, each chess piece are colored light and dark, which are basically designated as white and black. Each side start off with exactly 16 chessmen, and each chessman has a specific position. So let's see what their position and chess pieces order are. So basically each team has exactly 8 pawns which are arranged on the second last layer of the chessboard like this. Each team has exactly 2 rooks which are arranged at here, exactly 2 bishops, exactly 2 knights and a king and a queen, and similarly on the other side of the board. So it would look something like this. So the starting arrangement of the pieces on the boards looking from the white side would look something like this. And note, the queen always starts from the square of its own color and that the king is placed next to its queen. And also note that opposite kings and opposite queens are face to face each other, and you have to note that white always moves first no matter what. Now we'll come to the moving and capturing part of the game. So basically, a move is the transfer of a chess piece from one square to the another, and a capture is the removal of an opposing piece from the board, and it is actually accomplished by removing the piece which you want to capture or remove and replacing it with the capturing piece. And also note that you cannot capture your own piece, it should be of the opposing team. Now we'll see the power of each piece, at how it captures and how it moves. So let's start with the king. The king can move or capture one square in any direction, and the king cannot move to the square where it may get captured by the enemy pieces, nor the king can move to the square which are already occupied by its own pieces. The king can move in any direction and capture the enemy piece by removing its piece from the board and placing itself on that square of enemy piece. Then next comes the queen. The queen can move or capture in any direction as far as it wants, unless and until it is obstructed by the piece belonging to either side, like we'll see. The next comes the rook, and it can move or capture horizontally and vertically, like queen, but it lacks the power to move diagonally. The rook can capture a piece by removing the enemy piece and occupying its own square. Now the next comes the bishop. The bishop is limited to the diagonal moves or capture. It cannot move horizontally or vertically. Since the bishop can move only diagonally, it is confined to the square of the same color throughout the game. The bishop can capture any enemy within its moving range. So next comes the knight. The knight moves differently from any other pieces. Its crook move often confuses the new players. So I will describe it like the knight moves to the square which are reached by going 2 square vertically or horizontally, and then 1 square to the left or right, which can be seen like this. Also, you have to note that knight always land on a square which is different color from the one it started. Also, the knight is the only piece that can jump over the other pieces, either its own or the enemy's, in the course of its move. For example, in the initial position, white could start with any 4 knights move as shown. As it can jump over the other pieces, it gives kind of advantage, as it doesn't need any opening for moving, like bishop, king, queen or any other piece will require an opening, as these all are obstructed by the pieces of its own team. But this is not the case with the knight. Now next comes the pawn. Now comes the pawn. Unlike other pieces, the pawn moves in one fashion and captures in another. Also, it can only advance and never retreat. The pawn moves forward and never backward, one square at a time as shown in the figure. However, when the pawn is at its original square, it has the option of advancing 1 or 2 square on its first move. Also, you have to note that pawn captures diagonally forward to the left or right as shown. Like you can see, when it moves, it has the option to capture. Pawn actually captures diagonally to the forward or left as shown, but it cannot capture any piece which is in front of him as shown in the position. So in the shown position, it can be seen that the white pawn on the left can capture the knight, but it cannot capture the bishop which is in front of him, nor it can move one square ahead since it is blocked by the black bishop. Also interesting thing to notice that on the right side, neither pawn can move since each pawn blocks the path of the other pawn. You have to remember that the pawn, like the other pieces, replaces the piece it captures. Now there are certain special moves which you need to know before beginning to the chess. So the first move is castling. The castling is a move that allows you to place your king to a square that is reasonably safe from enemy's attack. Also note, it is the only move that involves a move of the two pieces on a single player turn. Castling is accomplished with king and either of the rook as shown below. You have to also note that in this move, the king moves two square toward the rook with which he intends to castle, and the rook is placed on the other side of the king. But there are certain limitations which you need to take care of while castling, because if those are not satisfied, the king cannot castle, and those limitations are: so firstly, if the king is under attack, then it cannot castle. Secondly, if the king or rook involved in the castling has previously moved, then also it cannot castle. Thirdly, if there are any pieces between the king and rook which are castling, then also it cannot castle. And last, for most important, in between castling, there is any square which is under attack, then also we cannot castle. Now the next special move is the pawn promotion. That is, when a pawn reaches the 8th rank, that is the enemy's back rank, it is promoted to any piece of the player's choice, that is queen, rook, bishop, or maybe knight of its own color. So the next special move is en passant rule. So this is a special capturing power of a pawn that applies to the capture of a pawn by pawn only, and also in a specific type of situation. That situation occurs when a pawn on the second rank, that is its original position, uses its option to advance 2 square on its first move and bypasses the enemy's pawn. Then the black or the enemy's pawn now has an option of capturing the white pawn as if it had advanced 1 square, like it will come in this diagonal position. But you have to remember that if the bypassed pawn does not exercise this power or this option of capturing the en passant at once, it cannot do so later in the game. So now we will see the relative values of pieces. So numerically, the relative value of various pieces can be expressed as follows. The pawn is given 1 point, the knight is given 3 points, bishop is technically a bit more valuable than the knight, so it is given 3.25 points, queen is given 9 points, and the king has infinite points. I mean to say, if you lose the king, you lose the game. Having said that, if you know this much, you are ready to proceed the next level of chess. And from next tutorial, we will see the basic elements of checkmate. So till then, see ya.